When you're walking the wrong path, there can be these warning signs that show up and indicate, hey, this path isn't quite right for you. Hey, you're meant to be doing something else. And it can tell you that you need to transition or that you need to do deeper work in order to properly connect to your calling. And when you ignore these warning signs, you can end up proceeding and living a life of regret. So I want to bring forward some recurring warning signs that I've seen with different people that I've worked with over the years, so that you can start to identify that, hey, if I do have this warning sign in my own life, then maybe I need to start to seriously consider changing or shifting my path. And my name is Joel Yuli. I'm a philosopher. I'm absolutely obsessed with vocations and callings, and that's why I'm here on places like YouTube. I write articles on Substack. I host a podcast called the Career Archetypes Podcast. That's why I have this online community that helps members to unearth their very own career archetype and choose the right career path with conviction, because it's my belief that every single person in this world has a calling. And it's a real modern tragedy that so many people aren't pursuing their callings, especially in the modern world where there's no reason why we can't go ahead and pursue this. And in thinking about these warning signs, one thing that I've noticed is that a lot of people will have these overlapping or similar warning signs. So I wanted to share a few of them. So the first one is that when people have just too many different interests, and it causes this sense of overwhelm and it causes a real confusion. So for example, somebody is thinking, hey, maybe I should be a Reiki practitioner because I'm into Reiki healing, but also I'm super into music. So maybe I should go ahead and pursue creating my own music, making my own beats. But also I'm really into painting. So maybe I should go ahead and create a YouTube channel that shows my own creative life, and I should express that creative life. But I'm also super into psychology or mental illnesses, and I want to go ahead and study that. Do I study that at university, or should I go ahead and study that on my own? What does that look like? And all of a sudden, all of these different interests cause multiple different pathways that create this sense of confusion that goes on. Now, what is going on here is typically that all these different fantasies or these different pathways that are presented in the mind that cause this confusion are very ungrounded. They don't have a base. They don't have a foundation. They're coming from a place that's up here as opposed to down underneath. And typically when people are on the wrong path and they start to mull over all of these different potential paths, they haven't properly connected with their own base, or what I would say is the soul level of themselves. They haven't connected with their own soul. And to connect with your own soul requires this deep sort of introspective work on yourself, this coming to awareness of self. Meaning that typically there was a line between where you are now and your connection to soul that was severed. And because of that severing, you can't tap into what the right actual walking forward of your path looks like is. And by not being able to do that, what ends up happening is that you start mulling over options that are very up in the air. They have no sense of rootedness. And so the solution is typically gaining a sense of self-awareness. And by doing that, you're actually able to find what that connection is for you. Now, this doesn't only happen with interests. It also happens with different ways of viewing your own personal life out in the world into the future. So to give you an example, if you're mulling over like, hey, should I also, pursue a life that is on a farm? I'm very isolated from society. I'm going to grow my own vegetables. I'm going to just, sort of push away the internet, push away sort of any collective connectivity, maybe have at night just a fire going. And I could really see myself living a life in nature, in a farm that's very, very isolated. But at the same time, I can also see myself in a city and being surrounded by lots of people, having a really rich social life, and also really engaging with the latest technology and the latest updates and being very involved in what is happening in the world. And there can be more than that as well, but you can see that these are quite distinct and different sort of realities for one to live in. And this once again comes from this inner understanding or this inner knowing of what you truly want in your life, how you truly want to proceed. And to know this, once again, you have to strengthen or reconnect that connection between this soul level of yourself, this level at which I call is the level that a career archetype exists, this energetic pattern that rules your path. And this up here level, which is where your mind works and where your emotions sit, and this higher sense of self. And so if those two things are disconnected, then it's very, very difficult to properly know what your path is. And if you are going through the stage of like, hey, I have so many different interests, so many different potential paths, I could do so many different things, know that this connecting the higher up mind with your deeper level soul is the way to go about knowing what the actual direction for you is. And it might not be any of the options presented. And a lot of the times when I work with people, many of the options that they're thinking about don't actually end up being the path. Now, the second clear warning sign that I often see when it comes to people pursuing their vocation or not being able to properly tap into it is having repetitive dreams. Meaning that when it comes to dream work, your dreams can symbolize and express to you a progression of your inner growth. When they're repeating, oftentimes it means that there's some sort of stagnation. You've stopped in some way progressing, either internally, psychologically, spiritually, or maybe there were external circumstances, or there are external circumstances that you feel are impeding you and causing you to be unable to forge your own way in this world. And so these dreams repeat because you probably haven't confronted it. Maybe you're not even consciously aware of it. And they're trying to call to your attention, like, hey, something here needs to change. I remember I was working with a student a while ago who was going through this process and was going through these different repetitive dreams. Now, the dreams weren't exactly the same. It was, she was getting into the back of a car and was never at the steering wheel. And in other dreams, she was sitting on a bus, was never at the steering wheel. In other dreams, she was sitting in the left side of the car, was never at the steering wheel. And by the way, that reveals that I'm from Australia. So you can imagine if you're from the US, if you're having a dream about a car, you're not at the steering wheel. And it was showing that she wasn't taking control of her life. In fact, she was allowing other people, parents, society, bosses, to take the steering wheel and to control her life. But that dream was going on again and again and again and again. And it was trying to call to her attention in a metaphorical and imagery type way that, hey, you need to actually take control of your life. And so if you're having repetitive dreams a lot, if they're showing up for you again and again, maybe in various different forms again and again, then you want to start looking at what those dreams mean, because they can indicate, again, a clear warning sign that, hey, you're not actually on your path, and perhaps you need to take your very own steering wheel. Now, the third clear warning sign that I've noticed is when people get overly pulled into and romanticize rich and wealthy paths. And so they find it really difficult to figure out what their path is. Maybe they've done a bit of soul searching even, and they can't quite nail it. And then all of a sudden somebody comes along, maybe it's on their phone or it's on YouTube, and they're telling them all about cryptocurrency. And suddenly they're starting to think like, oh, maybe if I go and invest all this money in Bitcoin, then suddenly I'm going to be a millionaire. And then after that, I can get to pursuing my calling. Once I'm rich, then I can get to my creative life. Then I can get to pursuing my vocation. But first, I'm going to go ahead and just do this sort of easy money path. Even people that see different influencers online can get pulled in and start to think like, hey, if I just grow a massive following and suddenly start doing product placements, then I can make some money. And then later on, I can start pursuing what it is that I actually want to be doing. And this pulls so many different people off their path, mainly because this is a money-led path and not a soul-led path. And over time, it just starts to weigh on them. It starts to pull energy from them. They're not truly connected to it. And because they're not truly connected to it, it's not meant for them. And so there's just all these blaringly obvious, like, hey, this isn't actually your path. I remember I was working with a student a while ago, and he ended up trying to figure out his calling before he came and met me. And before that as well, he had started to try to trade stocks online. And the reason was, and he told me that, hey, I can't do photography because I hadn't figured out how to make that work. I'm not even sure if that is actually my calling. And so instead, I'm going to make some money trading stocks. And then after that, I'm going to get back to figuring out what type of creative pursuit I want to do in this lifetime. But if I do this for 2 years, then I'll be able to make all the money and I can do whatever it is that I want. Now, interestingly enough, he also told me that during those 2 years where he was trading stocks, he felt no desire for it. He found it really difficult to show up for it. He didn't feel connected to it. And the money that he made actually caused him to break even. And I see this again and again as well, where people get into these, money paths and they end up either not making any money at all, or worse, they end up losing money. And this isn't to say, by the way, that people can't pursue paths that are in these sort of financial domains, or they can't pursue paths where they are growing an audience or a following and all this sort of stuff. But rather it's to say that if it's not your path, if it's not the one that you're called for, if you're not connected to it at a soul level, then it's going to be incredibly difficult to just even make that path sort of work. And so you need to start to think about this as rearranging these ideas in your mind when it comes to money and soul and lifestyle. Most people put money first. Most people put lifestyle first. However, very few people put soul first. And that's why I talk about a soul-led career. And when you put your soul at the forefront, everything else gets easier because you have this ongoing burning desire to actually pursue your path. And then you can figure out ways to make the money work, make the lifestyle work, but the soul needs to come first. What was interesting for me to find out when I was walking my own personal calling was that if you were to go into Reddit and you were to look up philosophy and how philosophers can go about pursuing a vocation within the field of philosophy, you'll find that most people just think it's a big joke. They also say that most people in philosophy either end up as professors who have to teach other people's philosophies, or alternatively, they end up becoming these sort of consultants or lawyers, and they're not able to properly practice their craft in the world in a way that pays them. And I remember seeing this and saying, I'm not doing that. I do not want to go and be a professor at a university. I do not want to go ahead and be a lawyer. I do not want to go ahead and be a consultant on the behalf of these particular big organizations. And there must be a different way. But only by pursuing my soul first was I able to then build on this sort of structure on top of that, a structure that allowed it to support me financially and support me in my lifestyle as well. And so if you're someone that's thinking hey, I should pursue money first, and then I'll get to my vocation, and then I'll get to a creative life, and then I'll get to actually pursuing the work that I feel called for, know that although it can be harder to confront the soul piece first, that it's properly organized and arranged, that with your soul at the base, everything else is stronger at every level. Yes, it might take a little bit longer. Yes, you might have to be a little bit more patient. Yes, you might have to do more self-work, but it's worth it in the long run to even spend a year or 2 years at the soul level. And then to start building on top of it, you have to remember your vocation is 30, 40, as human life expectancy goes up, it could be 50, 60 years long. And so to spend this time to properly nurture your roots at that level and then to build on it properly afterwards, I think is the right way to go about it. Now, the other clear warning sign that I wanted to bring to your attention is one where people serve others that they don't care about. They serve people that they just are I'm kind of just here for the money, I'm kind of just serving you because this is my job, and they don't feel any sort of connection to the people that they're serving. And this happens a lot with people that naturally find themselves in the service industry. So if we're to think about someone that is hosting their own restaurant, they're a chef, and they've decided that, hey, I'm going to open up my own restaurant, and they're serving people food. Imagine if that chef has no love for the customer. They don't really care about if the customer gets a nice meal. They don't really care about their experience. They don't really care that they're nourishing and feeding people. They have no connection to that person. The type of food that person's going to create, the type of food they're going to bring out and feed other people with is going to be pretty trash. It's not going to be nice. It's not going to be cared for. There's going to be a sense, even by other people without knowing that this person doesn't really care about them, that, hey, this isn't right. This isn't proper. I'm reminded of a famous chef, Marco Pierre White, who really is someone that you can look at and notice how to go ahead and pursue a vocation if you're looking for examples in the food industry. And what was interesting about him was that when people would come into his restaurant, he said that he treated it like his home, and he treated it like as if someone was coming over for the best meal of their life. And when he went to go and serve them, he was very, very connected to them. He wanted them to have an amazing time. Now, also, when people came in that were quite rude or arrogant or even obnoxious to staff, he would go out there and personally throw them out, kick them out. And the reason was that he was connected to not only his work, but the people that he served. And so if you're not connected to the people that you're serving out in the world and at your job, maybe you're currently thinking like, hey, do I really like this job? Do I really like these people? And they're probably not the people that you're meant to be serving. And they're meant to be served by someone else. And you're doing them and yourself a disservice by continuing to serve them in a way that isn't truly connected to the work that you're capable of. And by simply starting to look at like who are the kinds of people that I actually want to serve, that I would actually like to help, can actually open up doors into the types of work that you're meant to be doing. Now, the final clear warning sign that I wanted to mention is when people are really drained or exhausted by their work. Now, the interesting thing here to note is that every vocation requires energy, requires intense effort, it requires output. So everyone's going to go through a period of exhaustion, of energy being drained. But when it comes to pursuing a path that isn't yours, there's a second factor that you always have to take into account. So not only do you expend energy walking a path, but if it's not your path, oftentimes there's a sense of fakery. There's a sense of a persona fatigue, meaning that there's a part of you that you show to the world that isn't quite you, and you're pretending. And that's a second kind of energy toll. And people can get really taxed from this. So you can imagine someone that's constantly having to show up to online Zoom meetings, forcibly smiling and pretending to be happier than they are within this environment, and then getting off after a call and being incredibly drained from having to pretend for so long. And they're going to have to do that day after day after day after day, year after year. Unfortunately, people can do this for decade after decade, where they're just faking and pretending to be something that they're not, and doing work that they really do not feel connected to. And so it takes a real toll on people. And this can cause extreme exhaustion, extreme burnout. I've worked with people who end up going and taking off these extended periods of leave just to get themselves together again, because for such a long period of time, they've just been so spent and so taxed from the work that they're doing that isn't actually theirs. And the cool thing, though, is that a lot of people who go through these extended periods of post getting just like smashed from their current work environment is that they often start to reorient themselves and realize that, hey, this path isn't actually for me, and it took so much from me that there must be a better way. Now, I don't want you to have to get to that point where you're going through sickness or illness at an extreme level. Instead, if you're noticing already that you're getting drained, that the job that you're in is incredibly taxing, overly taxing, to the point where you can't even use a weekend to properly reset, then you want to start to question your current position, your current job, your current path, because this might be a big warning sign that you need to take heed of in order to start to connect to the actual path, which, whilst intense, can also be equally energizing and have a sense of vitality to it. And that's what you want. When you're connected to your work, it gives you things as well as you having to spend energy rather than just takes and takes and takes. And so these aren't all the warning signs out there. However, by simply beginning to acknowledge that there are particular warning signs around, if you start to become aware of certain things that feel a little bit off, that you intuit, like, hey, there's something amiss here, or that even thinking things through, you're like, yeah, these things don't add up, then it will bring you more awareness of like, hey, this isn't actually the path. And although it can be painful and to realize that, hey, this path that I've poured energy into, I studied for it, I've worked here for 10 years, I've spent a long time building my business, although that can be really painful to confront, know that in that pain, there's this helper. And the helper is like, hey, this pain isn't worth it. your actual calling is somewhere else, and you need to start to navigate towards that. And over time, obviously, as you start to transition and then start to walk that path, you'll know that it was all worth it. And so if you are interested in learning more about how to choose the right career path with conviction, if you want to know how to get away from these warning signs and start to proceed and walk your path, you can go ahead and check out our online community. So in our community, I have a full 8-week course that walks people through step-by-step how to unearth their very own career archetype. And by doing this, they're able to choose the right career path. And we use multiple lenses to look at ourselves to properly come to the right conclusion. We use Jungian psychology, astrology, social feedback. We really get to the essence of all of our multiple different interests so that we can find the core thread that holds everything together that's meant for us on our path. We look at these different becoming barriers, these particular challenges along the way, things like fear of failure, fear of success, a sense of potentially not belonging or people not loving us if we pursue a path that other people might judge. And we get to the core of what you're meant to be doing. I should also note that we currently have a holiday study program going on where there are different masterclasses that I've been dropping. I dropped one recently on vocations and the work-rest ethic, as well as understanding our public image in the world. And I am also about to drop one in a couple of weeks about branding and how to really be able to connect with your inner self and know which pieces of you need to come to public attention and which pieces should be held back. Now, there are also live study sessions inside. You'll see other members unearthing their career archetypes and sharing their experiences. So if that is something that pulls you in, I hope to see you inside, and I'll leave the link below.